From hunting down runaway slaves to embezzling millions from wounded war veterans. From watching the nation burn while doing absolutely nothing, to wrecking the economy and vanishing before anyone could point fingers. These are the 10 worst presidents in American history. And honestly, they're so spectacularly terrible that even your uncle who argues politics at Thanksgiving could probably do better. Buckle up, because this journey through presidential failure is about to get wild. Let's kick things off with Benjamin Harrison. A name so forgettable that if you showed his picture to 100 Americans today, 90 of them would probably say, "Wait, isn't that the guy from Titanic?" But don't let his obscurity fool you. This man left a mark on America. And not the good kind. More like the kind of mark you leave when you throw a brick through a window and run away before the cops show up. Picture this. It's 1,890, and Harrison decides to sign the McKinley tariff, cranking tariffs up to nearly 50%. The sales pitch: protect American businesses and make everyone rich. The reality? Prices skyrocketed faster than a SpaceX rocket. Foreign trade collapsed like a house of cards. And farmers got absolutely demolished. As if ruining international commerce wasn't enough, Harrison burned through the entire federal surplus like a teenager with their first paycheck at the mall. Spending spree after spending spree, money flowing like water. Here's the kicker. None of this economic disaster actually exploded until after Harrison left office.
You're under
The
arrest.
panic of 1,893 devastated the economy. Unemployment soared. Banks failed. And President Grover Cleveland inherited a dumpster fire so massive it could be seen from space. Meanwhile, Harrison, he was back in Indiana, living his best life. Writing books and pretending like nothing happened. No accountability. No consequences. Just peace out and leave someone else holding the bag.
Believe what I'm reading?
Harrison didn't commit war crimes or
outrage.
start conflicts. But he played economic Jenga with America's future. He pulled out all the wrong blocks and walked away whistling as the tower collapsed behind him. But as bad as Harrison was, he looks like a saint compared to Millard Fillmore, the president who turned every American citizen into a potential slave catcher. Yes, you read that correctly. Let me paint you a picture of 1,850 America. The nation was splitting down the middle over slavery. The South was all in on it, treating human beings like property. The North was increasingly uncomfortable with the whole situation. Tensions were rising. Threats of secession were flying around. And the Union itself was hanging by a thread. Enter Fillmore with his grand solution, the Fugitive Slave Act of 1,850. Possibly one of the most morally bankrupt pieces of legislation ever signed into law. This wasn't just about allowing slavery to continue in the South. This law legally required every single U.S. citizen, no matter where they lived, to assist in capturing runaway slaves. Think about that for a second. If an escaped slave showed up at your doorstep in a free state, exhausted, terrified, desperate for help, and you offered them a glass of water, prison, serious prison time, you could be fined $1,000, which in 1850 money was absolutely devastating, or thrown in jail for 6 months. Predictably, this backfired spectacularly. Normal people who had never really thought much about slavery were suddenly radicalized overnight. Imagine going about your business. Maybe you're a shopkeeper in Boston or a farmer in Ohio. And suddenly the government is forcing you to become a bounty hunter for human beings. Abolitionist movements exploded. People who'd been on the fence jumped off and landed firmly on the side of this is completely insane.
My dearest friends,
Fillmore
I
thought he
assure
was
you
preserving
that
the
I am a man
Union
of
and
the
keeping the peace.
dedicated to a future of
Instead,
prosperity and
he
unity.
poured gasoline on a smoldering fire and handed out matches. The nation didn't just inch closer to civil war, it sprinted toward it. Now, if Fillmore's legacy is embarrassing, William Henry Harrison's is just sad. This guy holds the record for the shortest presidency in American history. And the story of how that happened is almost too ridiculous to believe. In 1841, Harrison was elected at 68 years old, making him one of the oldest presidents at that time. People were whispering, "Is he too old? Does he have the energy? Can he handle the job?" Harrison heard the whispers and decided to prove everyone wrong in the most spectacularly misguided way possible. On Inauguration Day, he delivered the longest inaugural address in American history, nearly 2 hours of speech, and he did it without a coat, without a hat, in freezing weather, during a rainstorm. Picture your grandpa trying to do a kickflip on your skateboard to prove he's still got it. That's basically what happened here. Harrison was out there in the elements, soaking wet, catching his death of cold, all to prove he was tough enough for the presidency. A few weeks later, he came down with what started as a bad cold but quickly turned into pneumonia. For over a century, historians blamed that insane inaugural speech for killing him. But modern research suggests it was actually typhoid fever from contaminated drinking water at the White House. Either way, the result was the same. 31 days after taking office, William Henry Harrison was dead. He didn't sign a single law. He didn't make one meaningful decision. He spent more time writing his inaugural address than actually being president. But wait, it gets better. His death triggered a genuine constitutional crisis because nobody had actually figured out what happens when a president dies in office. Does the vice president just act as president temporarily? Do they become president for real? Is there a special election nobody knew? Thankfully, Vice President John Tyler basically said, "I'm president now. Deal with it." And everyone just kind of shrugged and went along with it, establishing the precedent we still follow today. William Henry Harrison's entire legacy is one epic speech and a really short stay at the White House. If there were a Hall of Fame for completely blowing a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, Harrison would be a first ballot inductee. But at least he didn't actively destroy the country. Which brings us to Franklin Pierce. Pierce had everything going for him. Movie star good looks, smooth-talking speeches, charisma for days. He got elected specifically to deal with the escalating slavery crisis. And then he made one colossal, nation-destroying mistake. The Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854. Let me explain why this was such a disaster. After the Louisiana Purchase, there was tons of unorganized territory. State lines were still being drawn. Governments were being established. And the big question everyone kept asking was, will these new territories allow slavery or not? For years, the Missouri Compromise had kept an uneasy peace by drawing a line across the country, slavery allowed below, banned above. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. Pierce threw all of that out the window. The Kansas-Nebraska Act established these areas as official U.S. territories, but added a deadly twist: popular sovereignty. The settlers themselves would vote on whether to allow slavery, completely overturning the Missouri Compromise. On paper, it sounds democratic. Let the people decide. Right. In practice, it was catastrophic. Pro-slavery and anti-slavery forces immediately flooded into Kansas. And they didn't come to debate. They came with rifles, torches, and murder in their hearts. The territory descended into absolute chaos. Houses burned. Families were slaughtered. Entire communities were terrorized.
They're all talking about
The
it.
violence was so intense and sustained that the period became known as Bleeding Kansas. A 5-year bloodbath that served as a horrifying preview of the Civil War to come. What did Franklin Pierce do to stop it? Absolutely nothing meaningful. Actually, worse than nothing. He backed the pro-slavery side, which had formed an illegitimate government through voter fraud and violence. He even sent in federal troops to stabilize this fraudulent government. Instead of calming tensions between North and South, Pierce accelerated the nation's march toward civil war. His presidency was a masterclass in how to take a bad situation and make it exponentially worse. But here's where things get interesting, because the next terrible president on our list might surprise you. Woodrow Wilson often shows up on lists of great presidents. He's celebrated for championing the League of Nations, for making lofty speeches about democracy, for leading America through World War I. And yes, he accomplished some significant things. But at home, he launched some of the worst attacks on American freedom in U.S. history. During World War I, Wilson signed the Espionage Act and the Sedition Act, making it a literal crime to criticize the government, the military, or even the American flag. Now, I love America as much as anyone. Patriotism is great, but this was straight up authoritarian. Under Wilson's administration, over 2,000 Americans were prosecuted. Journalists who questioned the war effort, union leaders who organized workers, everyday citizens who dared to speak their minds. Free speech, the absolute bedrock of American democracy, was crushed under the weight of wartime paranoia. Wilson thought this was all justified, all worth it for his grand vision. After the war ended, he pushed hard for the League of Nations, the first worldwide intergovernmental organization designed to maintain world peace. It was going to be his crowning achievement, his legacy, the thing that made all the sacrifices worthwhile. There was just one tiny problem: the U.S. Senate rejected it. They feared it would drag America into endless European wars and give up too much sovereignty. Wilson was devastated. He couldn't believe it. But here's the funny part: the League of Nations happened anyway, with 63 other countries joining, just not America. Wilson was left crying outside the club he'd tried to create, watching everyone else party without him. And to cap off his legacy of unintended consequences, he punished Germany so severely after World War I with the Treaty of Versailles that he planted the seeds for World War II. The harsh reparations, the territorial losses, the national humiliation, all of it created the perfect conditions for extremism to flourish in Germany. Wilson became a prisoner of his own ego, a man so convinced of his rightness that he refused to compromise, refused to bend, and caused chaos both at home and abroad. And speaking of causing chaos, let's talk about George W. Bush. Bush entered the White House with a handshake and a smirk, ready for what he probably thought would be a relatively normal presidency. Then history threw every disaster at him except a meteor strike. First came September 11th. Liang Yi. To his credit, Bush brought the country together for about 6 months. The unity was real. The national resolve was powerful. But what followed reshaped the world, and not for the better. The decision to invade Iraq was based on intelligence claiming Saddam Hussein possessed weapons of mass destruction. The threat was presented as imminent, terrifying, undeniable. Turns out, the intelligence was wrong. Dead wrong. There were no weapons of mass destruction. But by the time anyone figured that out, the United States was locked into a $1 trillion war that cost over $4 400 American lives, wounded tens of thousands more, and destabilized the Middle East for decades. The ripples from that decision are still being felt today. But like Woodrow Wilson before him, Bush also gutted civil liberties at home. The Patriot Act, passed in October 2001, dramatically expanded the surveillance powers of the federal government. The NSA and FBI could now surveil U.S. citizens without a warrant, collecting phone records, monitoring internet activity, building massive databases of information on Americans who'd done nothing wrong. You can argue this was necessary in the immediate aftermath of the worst terrorist attack on American soil. Many people did argue exactly that. But here's the thing, many of these powers still exist today, long after the immediate crisis passed. The surveillance state didn't dismantle itself when the danger receded. Then came Hurricane Katrina. And the federal government's response can be summed up in 3 words. We're working on it. As people were left stranded on rooftops, as New Orleans flooded, as citizens died waiting for help that came too slowly. The government set up the Louisiana Superdome as a shelter of last resort. When 30,000 people showed up seeking refuge, it turned into a nightmare.
Settles it.
The roof was damaged from the storm. The power failed. Toilets overflowed. The conditions were inhumane. The whole fiasco became a symbol of government inefficiency. And Bush was the poster child. Bush didn't just mess things up during his presidency. Americans are still living with the consequences today. The forever wars, the surveillance state, the erosion of trust in government disaster response. His legacy is complicated and deeply flawed. After Abraham Lincoln was assassinated,
Secession is illegal,
America
no
desperately
authority to
needed a
stop
steady, unifying hand to guide the nation through Reconstruction. Instead, the country got Andrew Johnson, a former slaveholder from Tennessee who, shockingly, didn't exactly believe in racial equality. Who could have seen that coming? Johnson vetoed the Civil Rights Act of 1866, which would have granted citizenship and basic rights to formerly enslaved people. We're talking about fundamental things here. The right to make contracts.
Oh, dear.
Your own property. To be treated equally under the law. Basic human dignity stuff. Johnson said no. Congress wasn't having it. They overrode his veto and pushed through the 14th Amendment, locking those rights into the Constitution itself. But Johnson didn't give up. He found other ways to prop up the former Confederacy and undermine Reconstruction. He issued mass pardons to tens of thousands of Confederates, people who had literally taken up arms against the United States. In most countries, throughout most of history, that's called treason. The punishment is usually prison or execution. But Johnson restored their rights, gave them back their property, and let them retake power in southern state governments. His reasoning, we shouldn't kick the losers while they're down. We need reconciliation, not revenge. Sounds noble.
I'm gonna make
right,
you all rich.
Except it backfired catastrophically. Johnson's policies helped launch the Jim Crow era, created fertile ground for the Ku Klux Klan to terrorize Black Americans for generations, and stoked racial tensions that are still being dealt with today. In Congress's eyes, Johnson had basically undone the entire point of winning the Civil War, so they impeached him. The first presidential impeachment in American history. Johnson faced trial in the Senate and survived conviction by just one vote. One single vote separated him from being removed from office. Post-Civil War, America needed a leader to rise above the hatred, to pull the country forward into a new era of equality and justice. Instead, Johnson doubled down on division and set progress back by decades. If you thought Johnson was bad, strap in for Herbert Hoover, who promised Americans a chicken in every pot and a car in every garage. People believed him because on paper, Hoover's resume was glittering. Self-made millionaire, international humanitarian who'd saved millions from starvation during World War I, respected public servant with a track record of getting things done. This guy was supposed to usher America into a new golden age of prosperity. Then, just months into his term, the stock market crashed in October 1929. The Roaring Twenties screeched to a halt. The Great Depression hit like a freight train, and Hoover froze. As a staunch capitalist and believer in limited government, Hoover was convinced that federal intervention would only make things worse. The market would correct itself. He insisted private charities and local governments could handle the crisis. Just give it time. Except it didn't get better. It got worse. Much worse. Banks collapsed by the thousands. Businesses shuttered. Unemployment soared to 25%. A quarter of Americans couldn't find work. Families were evicted from their homes. Bread lines stretched around city blocks. Shanty towns made of cardboard and scrap metal, nicknamed Hoovervilles in his dishonor, sprouted up across the country. The final devastating blow to Hoover's reputation came in 1932 with the Bonus Army incident. 15,000 World War I veterans marched peacefully on Washington, D.C., demanding early payment of bonuses they'd been promised. These were men who'd served their country, who'd fought in the trenches, who'd sacrificed for America. They weren't asking for charity, they were asking for money they'd been promised. Money they desperately needed to survive the Depression. Hoover's response: he sent in the U.S. Army, led by General Douglas MacArthur. Federal troops used tear gas, tanks, and bayonets to violently clear the peaceful encampment. Veterans were beaten. Their makeshift homes were burned. When photographs of American soldiers attacking American veterans hit newspaper front pages across the country, Hoover's fate was sealed. His legacy transformed from humanitarian hero to cold. Clueless man who fumbled the Great Depression and turned military force against veterans. But no list of terrible presidents would be complete without James Buchanan. The man who watched the Civil War unfold from the front row and did absolutely nothing to stop it. When Buchanan took office in 1857, the nation was already tearing apart over slavery. The question wasn't if something bad would happen, it was when, and how catastrophic it would be. Buchanan had a choice: take decisive action and lead, or do nothing and hope the problem solved itself. Instead, he chose option 3, let the Supreme Court handle it. This led to the infamous Dred Scott decision, which declared that Black Americans could never be citizens and had no rights that white Americans were bound to respect. Buchanan didn't just accept this decision, he celebrated it. He even pressured justices behind the scenes to make a sweeping pro-slavery ruling, thinking this would settle the debate once and for all. Spoiler alert, it didn't settle anything. It lit a fire under the North. Outrage exploded. 3 years later, Abraham Lincoln, who opposed the expansion of slavery, won the presidency without receiving a single Southern electoral vote. The South panicked. With no more national political power, Southern states began seceding from the Union before Lincoln even took office. And Buchanan, still president during this crucial transition period, took his characteristic stance of doing absolutely nothing useful. He insisted that secession was illegal, but also claimed the federal government had no constitutional authority to stop it. Thanks for nothing. Dude, by the time Buchanan finally left office, 7 states had seceded. Federal forts had been
Even
seized.
I could
The
do
country was in
better.
free fall towards civil war. Buchanan's legacy isn't defined by a single scandal or one bad law. It's defined by his catastrophic failure to act when the nation's very survival was at stake. History remembers him as the president who could have prevented the Civil War but chose inaction instead. Watching America burn while he wrung his hands and insisted there was nothing he could do. You might think it couldn't possibly get worse than that. You would be wrong. Because the worst president in American history is Warren G. Harding. A man so unqualified for the job that he openly admitted it. Harding once privately confessed, "I am not fit for this office and should never have been here." For once in his presidency,
We need to learn
he was
from our
telling the
mistakes and hold them
absolute
accountable.
truth.
Yes,
Harding
checks
ran
and
on a
balances.
platform of returning
Let's make our
America to
democracy
normalcy after World War I. Instead, he delivered the most corrupt administration in American history, stacking his cabinet with the Ohio Gang, a collection of poker buddies, drinking pals, and political cronies who looted the federal government like it was their personal piggy bank. Take the Teapot Dome scandal,
We
where the
promise
Secretary
not
of
to be
the
as bad
Interior
as these
secretly
10.
leased federal oil reserves to
Our
private
campaign
companies
pledge is
in exchange
minimal
for
competence.
enormous bribes.
Today,
That's
we're going
bad
to
enough.
examine historical patterns
Right,
that reveal
but it gets
warning
worse.
signs.
The head of the Veterans
I
Bureau
see.
embezzled millions of dollars meant for wounded soldiers, men who'd sacrificed their bodies for their country, while he bought mansions and lived the high life. The Attorney General allegedly took kickbacks to look the other way while criminals ran wild
These
during
historical
Prohibition.
leaders also serve as
And what was Harding
cautionary
doing
tales.
while his administration robbed America blind golfing,
You
gambling,
cannot possibly put him
drinking,
above.
which was
He
illegal
was
during
a
Prohibition?
competitive failure.
By the way,
Oh, come on
having
now.
multiple affairs while in
Here is your
office,
award, a
the man
truly
turned the White House into a frat
spectacular
house
failure.
while his friends
Oh,
ransacked
I
the
simply
Treasury.
do not believe
Harding
this.
himself summed up his presidency perfectly. I have no trouble with my enemies. I can take care of my enemies in a fight. But my damn friends, they're the ones that keep me walking the floor at nights. Maybe the guilt started eating away at him. Because
What
Warren
if
G.
thing had
got
been
it.
different?
Harding died of a heart
Imagine the
attack in
possibilities.
1923.
A brighter future.
Right in the middle
indeed.
of all the scandals, leaving the country shocked at the rot festering inside his administration. Harding's presidency didn't just damage trust in
Obvious
government, it
incompetence.
shattered it
An
completely.
undeniable verdict.
And maybe that wasn't entirely a bad thing. Because today, we're still appropriately skeptical of political corruption, even when it's happening right in front of our faces. There you have it, the worst presidents in American history. They didn't just fail at their jobs, they nearly broke America
Thank
itself,
goodness for that.
leaving scars that took generations to heal. But if you think their legacies are dark, wait until you hear how they died. Some choked, some got shot, and others just dropped dead at the worst possible moment. Trust me, that story gets even crazier.